Mr. Rosenbaum, you've been with Department of Justice for over 35 years, and for decades you were hunting down Nazis, as many media outlets said. What lessons you learned on investigating Nazi war crimes that might apply to your current work on investigating Russian war crimes in Ukraine?
The lessons that we learned from investigating and prosecuting World War II Nazi perpetrators who came to this country are numerous. World War II Nazi cases and these, fundamentally it's the same issue, wartime crimes and who perpetrated them and how do you prove it. A difference, an unhappy difference, shall we say, in the World War II cases, Nazi Germany was succeeded by a responsible German government that has prosecuted its own people for participation in Nazi crimes. As you might imagine, there's no expectation of getting cooperation from the Russian Federation authorities anytime soon. In this instance, the war is, of course, still on. The tragedy continues. The crimes are still being committed. And that makes these cases, certainly for me and most of my colleagues, I would say, the most urgent ones that we've ever encountered, because the crimes are still being perpetrated and there is a heightened need to send the message out to would-be perpetrators that the United States is partnered with the government of Ukraine, with the Ukrainian Prosecutor General's office in particular, with the National Police of Ukraine, and with authorities all over Europe to investigate and prosecute these cases. So if you dare execute, say, a criminal order, you will never, ever be able to be confident that you've gotten away with it. You will have to look over your shoulder for the rest of your life into old age, just the way Nazi perpetrators have had to do.
As someone who investigated multiple Nazi war crimes and now is looking into cases of Russian war crimes in Ukraine, what would you say to Putin's message about denazifying Ukraine?
After actually 37 or so years investigating and prosecuting World War II Nazi cases, I think I can say that I know a Nazi when I see one. The Ukrainian government is not a Nazi government. Two countries in living memory have invaded Ukraine without provocation: Nazi Germany and the Russian Federation. So who's channeling the Hitler regime? It's not the government in Kyiv.
Russian forces committed multiple crimes in Ukraine, and many of them are very well documented, many of them documented in live mode, such as bombing of houses, crushed theater in Mariupol, extrajudicial killings, executions, including prisoners of war. Could you shed light on the current cooperation with Ukrainian authorities and International Criminal Court investigators on investigating those crimes?
Sure, there are probably two aspects that I should focus on. One is enforcement of our own laws here. And that too has, you could argue, two components. One is the task force kleptocapture, which Attorney General Merrick Garland announced in March, which is pursuing, among others, the facilitators of aggression by the Russian Federation. Most of your viewers have probably seen the news photos of super yachts that our government has confiscated from oligarchs who are supporting the Putin government. And then there are also our own investigations of war crimes. That effort is led by my colleague here, Christian Levesque, who is lead prosecutor for the Ukraine cases. There is the International Criminal Investigative Training Assistance Program, ISATAP, that works very closely with the National Police of Ukraine. They've done that for years. They are now pivoting to support war crimes investigations in the field, so to speak. There is forensic support. There is all kinds of technical support, including IT support, and some things I can't go into. But it's a very, very close relationship. And we actually met with the Office of the Prosecutor General of Ukraine just yesterday. So we're very busy in that cooperative effort.
And in terms of the U.S. investigations and prosecutions, you mentioned that really on almost a daily basis, we're all bombarded with stories of atrocities that are occurring in Ukraine. It's the job of prosecutors and investigators to work together, both domestically but also with our international counterparts, to sift through that information, to methodically assess it. We are trying to do this in another country during a time when there's an active armed conflict. But we're doing all of those things collectively.
I understand that it's difficult to talk about the ongoing investigation, but could you tell the common details on what cases you are investigating?
So unfortunately, I can't talk about specific investigations. What I can say, as the Attorney General has also stated publicly, is that where the U.S. has jurisdiction under our War Crimes Act, that is, when a U.S. Citizen is a victim or a perpetrator of a war crime, it is our duty, as well as our, to exercise our due diligence and to investigate those circumstances to determine whether a war crime that is actionable under our statute has occurred. The reason that we don't speak publicly about investigations is because this is really a central tenet of that concept of the rule of law, which is that we are going through our processes without interruption, without bias, and without outside influence. And in order to do that, that means that we conduct our investigations in a manner that is not public.
And more on cooperation. There are a lot of international bodies that you already mentioned. There are a lot of organizations that are tracking down war crimes that are committed in Ukraine. And UN Human Rights Council established independent commission of inquiry. Given the massive scale of crimes being committed in Ukraine right now, what do you think would be the best forum for prosecutions?
So I think that there is no one answer in terms of what is the best forum for prosecutions. And that's one of the things also that is particularly remarkable about what we are seeing right now in Ukraine and in this time and place, which is Ukraine itself, as a national authority, has a well-functioning legal system with capacity and ability to actually investigate the crimes that are occurring on their soil. And so it is a very important part of accountability measures that they continue to do so. It's also a responsibility of the international community, and that is other national authorities, the United States, and international organizations to assist and support in that process, and also to play their own role. And one of the roles that we're playing in the United States is when we have U.S. jurisdiction, we are also doing our own investigations.
Mr. Rosenbaum, you mentioned meeting with Ukrainian authorities, mentioned meeting with Ukrainian Prosecutor General. Could you tell us if you heard about any special request where United States help might be needed, when United States assistance might be needed in investigating of Russian war crimes committed in Ukraine?
We've received requests, and we always assess those and act on them as appropriate. I really can't go into the specifics. And as I say, we have propounded our own investigative requests because our investigations are well underway. One of the remarkable experiences that we've had in this work, Ms. Levesque and I, we were in The Hague in July for the Ukraine Accountability Ministerial Conference. And 45 nations all meeting in pursuit of the same goal, holding accountable the perpetrators of war crimes and other grave offenses committed in Ukraine since the commencement of Russia's unprovoked invasion. In my lifetime, and I've been on this planet quite a while now, there's nothing to compare with that. 45 nations coming together for that singular goal. Our Attorney General has said that the Department of Justice will leave no stone unturned in our efforts to pursue accountability. He's also said we'll be relentless. We take that charge very seriously. We are relentless, and we will be relentless, however long it takes.
You mentioned yourself that there is massive evidence and massive proof of war crimes committed in Ukraine, and that is very different from your work on investigating and looking into Nazi war crimes, where there might be not so much proof and records available online. You've seen footage from Levesque, barbaric videos of torturing and killing prisoners of war, including putting parts of the body of Ukrainian prisoner of war on the fence in Popasna. The amount of visual proof is sometimes overwhelming, and including from accounts of Russian soldiers themselves in social media. Is that helping investigation?
All of these kinds of images and intercepted communications can be important evidence. Again, this is the kind of evidence that usually one didn't have in the World War II Nazi cases. But sometimes, you don't need all that much evidence. I have in mind the last World War II Nazi case that we won only 2 years ago. The defendant was in his 90s. And that case began with a waterlogged SS personnel card pulled from Lübeck Bay, Germany in 1950. It was only partially legible, but it had our man's name on it. And he worked as a guard at a concentration camp from which virtually no records survived. But we have the talent, the experience to build cases from a very small sample of evidence, and we're deploying those skills in partnership with the FBI, Homeland Security Investigations in the Department of Homeland Security, lots of components of the Justice Department, and of course we work alongside the Department of State.
Ms. Levesque, back to you. It's understandable that you can't provide any further details on the ongoing investigations, but who are the perpetrators whose war crimes you are investigating? Is it soldiers, commanders, militias? Who are the war criminals, their general portrait?
So when we're looking at our investigations, we don't necessarily have one category of a perpetrator, right? We're looking at the conduct, and whoever it is that committed or potentially committed that conduct, again, if it falls within our war crime statute, is a potential target of an investigation. So that includes people that are sort of the so-called trigger pullers, right? People who were actually firing the shots that killed a victim if the circumstances otherwise suggest it is a war crime. It also includes commanders who are at a mid-level as well as upper commanders, and so upper-level commanders.
And could you walk us through the process of identifying whether one or another crime committed in Ukraine is a war crime or crime against humanity?
Sure. So we would start first with looking at whether we have jurisdiction, and as I've already mentioned, it's fairly limited. Then we would start to look at the circumstances, right? In this case, we know that there is an armed conflict and an international armed conflict that's occurring in Ukraine. Then we would look at what is the nature of the actual conduct, and does it fit within our statute? Does it appear to be an intentional killing of a civilian who is not participating in hostilities? Does it appear to be the intentional infliction of unnecessary suffering on a person who is protected? Does it appear to be an unlawful confinement of a protected person? Or does it fall in some other way within our war crime statute? So we literally take out our statute book, we look at it, we look at what the conduct is and the facts and the allegations, and see if we have a match.
What about the President of Russia, Vladimir Putin? According to, again, this doctrine of superior responsibility, shouldn't he be the one who is responsible for the war crimes committed by Russian soldiers in Ukraine? One of the U.S. senators and some European leaders said that Putin should get Slobodan Milosevic treatment, and President Biden called Vladimir Putin himself as a war criminal. With the evidence that links Putin directly to the war crimes that are committed in Ukraine, and As Nuremberg trial authors once said, initial and fundamental supreme crime, the crime of actually planning an attack and aggression on a sovereign state. Shouldn't be there a tribunal for Putin, the one that Milosevic had, Nuremberg format, for instance?
So we're the Department of Justice in the United States, and we don't generally accuse people except through our own legal process, right? In indictments, in court, and the like, unless we're part of some international tribunal. So I'll have to leave those characterizations to the president and others. But it is good that you mentioned Slobodan Milosevic. I would add the former East German leader, Erich Honecker, to the panoply of foreign leaders who never imagined that law would catch up with them. Sometimes it does.
When you were in Ukraine, together with the Attorney General Garland, he said there is no hiding place for war criminals. With the number of war crimes that are committed in Ukraine, prosecution of war criminals will take probably years or tens of years. Do you expect a lot of countries to be ready to cooperate and extradite Russian war criminals?
When I was with the Attorney General on June 21 in Ukraine, I want to say first that it was very sad to be there because of what's going on, but it was also very inspiring to see the courage and the determination of our Ukrainian colleagues to pursue justice and to fight for the integrity, the territorial integrity of their country. One of the prosecutors was actually in his military fatigues. As the Attorney General, I think, accurately said, there will be no hiding place for criminals, and the fact that we got 45 nations to, in effect, agree on that concept at The Hague in mid-July, I think exemplifies that reality. It may indeed take years or tens of years for comprehensive justice to be obtained, but I do believe it will be.
Mr. Rosenbaum, you mentioned yourself that there is a difference between post-war Germany and Russia, that Russia will not be probably willing to cooperate unless there is a change of government. Is there a procedure to deliver justice for the victims of war crimes of Russian soldiers in case if they are not leaving the country, in case if there is no extradition, without cooperation of Russian authorities?
Well, most likely this is going to have to be accomplished without cooperation from Russian authorities unless, as you say, there is a change of government and a change of attitude. And who knows what the future holds. There are various mechanisms, including, frankly, civil liability, that will help secure some measure of justice even outside the criminal justice system. And it's going to be a lot of different courts in many different countries and a lot of different organizations, governmental, intergovernmental, and non-governmental, that will all be working together, are already working together to pursue justice on behalf of victims, and that includes providing services to surviving victims who are dealing with physical and psychological impacts of what they've experienced.
You discussed the Department of Justice work on holding accountable the perpetrators of war crimes in Ukraine. Is the agency work dependent somehow on any of American parties' support? Ukraine has bipartisan support in the United States, but do you envision any changes in DOJ's work in case if there will be changes in the Congress or administration?
If I use the World War II Nazi cases as an example or as my measuring basis, Our experience was that the commitment to pursuing justice in those cases did not vary by which party was in power in the United States. Ukraine has strong bipartisan support. It has support throughout this country in all 50 states and the territories. And it's really unimaginable that a different administration would not be devoted to pursuing accountability as is obviously needed.
Well, thank you so much for the interview and the
Thank you
great
for what you're
responses.
doing.